Our topic is drought and desertification in the Sahel. So desertification is the process by which fertile lands lose their plant life and is accompanied by a drying out of the soil and a loss of soil fertility. This is an especially severe problem in the Sahel region of Northern Africa under the Sahara Desert, pictured at the right.
So a lot of studies show that human activity really led to the drought and desertification in the Sahel region. One study specifically looked at human activity in northern Nigeria and looked at what specifically led to the drought. And a lot of that included poverty in the region caused a lot of farmland to be required because the demand for resources was large. So a lot of agriculture was happening. And since it was so high in demand and urgent, they didn't pay attention to the land use. And so overgrazing occurred and just in general, lack of care in increasing biodiversity of the crops. So these unsustainable practices happen so often because the population exploded within the last couple decades. So there were also no government policies in place in order to prevent misuse of the land. So there was no protection of the environment and the climate during this time. So just misuse of the land led to a lot of drought and desertification, and it really changed the land that is in the Sahel region. So some of the other causes that led to this were the climate change impacts that caused this drought. So while the area is naturally prone to drought, the drought has been so long over the last 30 years that it is clear that it's not just normal drought conditions in the area, it's due to climate change, which is happening. And this study specifically looked at Niger, which is also in the Sahel region, and the climate was studied in 13 different regions of the country. And basically the climate is unstable, and there's severe changes in wind patterns, which change the temperature, which bring changes in climate. And then there's humidity coming from the Atlantic Basin, which is changing the rainfall patterns. And all of these changes in the rainfall patterns have made the drought more serious and more dangerous. So the drought conditions have been severely worsened by existing impacts of climate change. So the climate change is being increased by this.
So when we're looking at the environmental impacts of desertification in the Sahel, we acknowledge that the seed cause of the desertification is a decrease in plant activity as trees were cleared out for farmland and small vegetation was cleared as a result of overgrazing of livestock. And what we've seen as a result of this decrease in plant activity is a weakening of soils, because as the plants are killed and rooted up from the soils lose their support, making them looser and become sandier and gravelier and more gravelly in texture. This makes it harder for the soils to retain moisture, to retain nutrients, and to support important microbiomes for plant growth. So in turn, with the plants dying, weakening the weakened soil then cannot support plant life as well, creating a cycle that doesn't really end without human intervention, especially because newer plants that could grow to heal the soil and turn the pattern around are often killed either from a lack of nutrients because the soil doesn't have enough to support them, or physically by runoff during rainstorm events because the soil doesn't absorb enough water to prevent strong channels from washing these plants away. So this is a cycle that threatens to destroy the ecosystem without human intervention, not just because it harms plants, but because it in turn harms any animals that rely on plants for food and any animals that hunt those. So it threatens an entire ecosystem collapse, if not stopped by human intervention.
We can take a look at the implications of the desertification of the region. So first, food insecurity from a decreased agricultural output and an arid landscape because of they're not able to use farmland like they were before because of it's no longer fertile and usable. Also economic collapse of the agricultural sector because they can't sell the crops they once produced because they don't have nearly as much yield, as you can see in the graph below, resulting in also in mass urban migration and increased crime in all areas. This is just a common thing that occurs when an area becomes poor. You know, people try to leave to find better areas. People are resorting to more crime to feed their families, and also the previous effects listed, they also cause lower life expectancy, as well as the more residents being in critical need of help. Millions of people are put in this after the desertification. Also, more and more species will be endangered or extinct. This is because there is a decrease in biodiversity in the region because it's now more arid, so less creatures can live there. So, you know, if you had other birds or plants stuff that could live in a more forest-like environment, a drier and hotter environment is less suitable for them. And finally, for potential solutions, now you can see that there needs to be policy changes to occur, agricultural changes in land use to prevent further damage. This is important because overgrazing and using like the same crops that decrease biodiversity is one thing that caused this. So the decrease in that could help. Also providing more support for the Great Green Wall or the GGW, the project. Its goal is to plant trees, limit the spread of the desertification. As you can see below, it's supposed to stretch all the way across the Sahel region around the border of where the desertification is occurring. And however, the one main issue with the project is that it's not being implemented nearly as fast and not enough effort has been put into it. While it could feasibly work, there's not nearly enough trees being planted. But yeah, and here is our resources.